Okay, so I'm just going to start with reading the passage of Matthew's Gospel just after the feeding of the 5,000, where we get to Jesus walking on water. So the scripture says, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he would send the crowds away. After sending the crowds away, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, while the boat, now far out on the lake, was battling with a heavy sea, for there was a headwind. In the fourth watch of the night, he went towards them, walking on the lake, and when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But at once Jesus called out to them, saying, "Courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." It was Peter who answered, "Lord," he said, "if it is you, tell me to come to you across the water." "Come," said Jesus. Then Peter got out of the boat and started walking towards Jesus across the water. But as soon as he felt the force of the wind, he took fright and began to sink. "Lord, save me," he cried. Jesus put out his hand at once and held him. "Man of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And as they got into the boat, the wind dropped. The men in the boat bowed down before him and said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Usually when we read that scripture passage, we focus on Peter, on his stepping out onto the water, taking his eyes off Christ and starting to sink. But actually, I want to just focus on the beginning of that passage when we're talking about advocacy for the moment. Because here's the thing. The distance that they were sailing from Bethsaida to Gennesaret by boat across the Sea of Galilee is somewhere between 10 and 13 kilometres, depending on the route that you take. And even at the longer end of that distance, at the 13 kilometres, it would have taken an experienced first century fisherman about 90 minutes in favourable conditions to get to the other side. And even in adverse conditions, AI tells me that it would take about 5.5 hours to get across the 13 kilometres in an average first century fishing boat. But if we go back to the scripture, we know that the disciples had left Bethsaida before 6 p.m. because the passage notes that when evening came, Jesus was there alone. And by the time Jesus comes to them walking on the water, it's the fourth watch of the night, so it's sometime after 3 a.m. So they've been on the lake for at least 9 hours, probably more, after an already full and exhausting day with the 5,000. This wasn't a regular storm that they were facing. This was one heck of a storm. It was dark and there was water coming in from every side. And they were battling a headwind, meaning they were rowing hard just so that they could stay in the same place. And the reason I wanted to start here, because if we're talking about practical lessons from the front lines of advocacy, what I really want you to know is that the experience of the disciples in this boat is what the front lines of advocacy are looking and feeling like at the moment. Even the most zealous of advocates in this space are exhausted from battling hard against the headwinds of regressive ideologies that have managed to control the narrative and the politics for a decade now, and just trying to make sure that we don't lose any more ground. The water is coming in from every side at local, state and federal government levels, in the courts and tribunals, the bureaucracies, the regulatory authorities, the media and more, and it's still dark out there. And if we are feeling like this, we need to be conscious that our people, the ones who we are trying to motivate, are feeling like this as well. They may not be as eye deep in it as we are, but they're tired too. And I know that many of you in this room are well across the intricacies of the inquiries and the submissions and the consultations and the roundtables and the elections and the by-elections, but that's because a lot of us have the space to be doing this full-time, or at least as a decent part of our time. But if we're trying to encourage and motivate and educate and inform lay people with full-time, non-ministry jobs, families and other activities, they might know a bit of what's going on, and they'll know it's important, but that's about it. Let's go back to the storm. If, like the disciples in the boat, we're fatigued, we're also acutely aware that it was Christ who made us get into the boat in the first place. And so he wants us in this fight, and he didn't put us into the boat alone. One of the great gifts that has come, I think, over this past decade of fighting these battles and being in the storm is the collaboration amongst the different faith communities for religious freedom. A decade ago, I think it would have been unthinkable that this type of unity happens, not only amongst the Christian churches, but amongst other faith communities alone. So we're in the boat, we know Christ put us here, and we're in it together. So in light of all of this, what are the lessons in the front line of advocacy? And I really do think that our biggest challenge going forward is going to be the fatigue of battling on numerous fronts for religious freedoms and helping our people navigate this increasingly complex space. So I think our call is to do three things, just three things. The first thing I think we need to do is be very, very clear. So make our explanations on these matters clear. There are enough legal nerds in this room, myself included, who love to get into the intricacies of some of the laws and the constitutional aspects and everything like that. But once somebody opens their mouth and says, Section 38 of the Sex Discrimination Act says, blah, everybody's eyes glaze over, right? So I think we really do need to make it clear to our, as clear as we can. One pages, that's about it. The other thing I think we need to do is make it personal. A lot of these conversations can seem theoretical, affecting people who aren't like us, churches, schools that aren't like ours. And I really do think we need to make it clear to people about how the theory that we're talking about can impact themselves, their jobs, their families, and things like that. Real life stories are really important here, letting people understand how this type of theory will operate in practice. And the last thing I think we need to do is to make it easy. We need to make it very easy for people to engage. Before I joined the Board of Freedom for Faith, as Mike mentioned, I've only joined just recently, but that's why I love the new strategy of the Contact Your MP tool, which some of you might be familiar with, but it's a separate website under the Freedom for Faith banner that gives people information on how to contact their MPs on these types of issues. But you'll open up the page and we'll say, okay, what are the current fights? We've got WA conversion therapy here. We've got religious freedom we've got religious discrimination in this state over here. You click on your option and then it's like, okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to go and meet with your MP? Here's details of your local MP and how to do that, a one-pager on how to do that, talking points. Do you want to write to them? Do you want to call them? These types of things. We have to make it as clear and easy for our people as we can, because there's too much other stuff going on in the storm. So that's just some quick thoughts on the front lines of advocacy and how we can make it easy for our people. I don't want to keep anybody past lunch too long. The next part of my talk was supposed to be about how to engage the Catholics, given that I'm trying to assist the Catholics also in engaging in this space. I was going to spend a little bit more time on this, but there's been a matter pop up this week that I wanted to talk about, so I'm just going to give a quick few thoughts on engaging Catholics. The first thing I'll say is that trying to reach Catholics in their parishes on a Sunday on topics like this doesn't usually work. Our liturgies are very structured, preaching is on the scripture of the day and doesn't really deviate from that. So I know some of our other churches will have wonderful sort of sermon series on these types of issues going through. That's not going to happen. So if you're trying to sort of capture the attentions of Catholics while they're at Sunday Mass for political activation, it's not going to work. And I'll look at Father Matt, who's in this room, and say, and priests tend to throw out flyers that they receive in the mail for handing out. So a couple of key points. One of the first things is that you need the support of the bishop. Catholics don't always listen to their bishop, but if you don't have... No, sorry. Can we scrub that out of the live stream? But you're not going to get their input unless you have the support of their bishop. Because all of the time, so many times when these types of advocacy things pops up, the first question someone will ask me was, what does the Archbishop say? And if the Archbishop backs it, then they're on. And if he doesn't, or if he's silent, then they tend to not engage. So it's really, really important for the Catholics to have the engagement of the bishop. And the other really interesting thing is that we did a survey a little while ago of the most politically active Catholics, so those who are the ones who are signing our petitions, making submissions to parliamentary inquiries and things like that. We asked them, where do you get your news on matters like this? And 80% of them named their parish newsletter as the place where they find most of the information. Only half of them got it from the Catholic Weekly newspaper, half of them got it from social media. So interestingly, it's actually getting into your local parish newsletter that is the most important and easiest way to engage Catholics, which sounds really old school, but our most politically engaged, that's where they're going to find this information. So clear, concise enough to get into a parish bulletin and with the backing of the bishop. I'm just going to leave the bit about engaging Catholics there because I'm going to throw away the last part of my talk and talk instead about a significant religious freedom case that's made news this week. Some of you might be aware of it, many of you might not be. But Melbourne Archdiocese Catholic Schools, or MACS as an acronym, which is the overarching body for Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Melbourne, is being sued by a non-binary teacher, or a teacher who identifies as non-binary, for discrimination. And this teacher, Micah Sanders is their name, works at the school, and Max has described them as a valued and respected member of the teaching staff. There'd been some issues in the past with Sanders, like handing out pride stickers to students and things like that. But the real crunch and the real conflict with the school has come is that Sanders is now requesting that the school staff and students use their preferred title and pronouns. So they want to be known as they, them, and with the prefix MX, which I think is pronounced mix or mox, depending on your choice. And they want that to be on all of the correspondence, all of the school timetables, obviously in the classroom and things like that. And this is where the school has drawn the line, because they said degendering somebody is contrary to Catholic anthropology. We're just not going to do it. We're not going to force the staff to do it. We're not going to force the students to do it. And so now the claim for discrimination. I want to be clear, the teacher hasn't been fired, hasn't otherwise been treated differently, but it's just really the sticking point is the pronoun use. And what I find interesting about this case is the case has already been to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, but VCAT, Max had argued that this actually isn't within the jurisdiction of VCAT because it relates to the Section 109 inconsistency. So for the lawyers in the room, when you've got a state law like the Victorian Equal Opportunity Act that's inconsistent with the federal law, which has broader protections, the Federal Sex Discrimination Act, the argument is that the federal law will override the state law to the extent of the inconsistency. So Max has gone in and said, actually, we're relying on the protections of the federal law, and so this now becomes a matter of federal versus state. It's a constitutional matter, and it's going to the Melbourne Magistrates Court next month instead. Professor Neil Foster has written extensively on this in theory, on the idea of the Sex Discrimination Act being inconsistent with stricter state laws that restrict religious freedom, and this looks like it will be the test case. And if media reports are anything to go by, both sides have indicated their willingness to take this all the way to the High Court. So this will be a very big test case. And it's interesting because at its heart, this isn't about whether or not a non-binary teacher is accepted to be employed at a school. The school employed them. But it's whether they can come into a faith-based school and require staff and students to conform to their own beliefs that are contrary to the beliefs of the school. And as Alex was just mentioning, religious freedom has to include the ability to associate and for a person who doesn't share their beliefs to find more suitable employment rather than trying to enforce their beliefs on those there. I'd have to say, if this is sort of the test case that the equality side want to run, my sense is that they've picked the wrong plaintiff, because I'm not sure that the public would be very sympathetic to making school students in a faith-based school address a teacher as mix or mox or something like that. I think that you might draw the line there. And I think this is something that people understand. The former PM, John Howard, said last year on this very topic, he said, it's very simple. You have a perfect right, if you're running a Catholic school or an Anglican school, if you've got a teacher who's kicking against the fundamentals of the religion to say, we wish you well, God bless you, but go find a job somewhere else. And the former PM said, I think that's common sense, and I think most Australians would agree. My sense is that most Australians will agree with that, that this isn't about denying somebody employment, this isn't about expelling a student or anything like that. This is just about, you can't come into a faith-based organisation and then expect them to conform to your beliefs. But it's an interesting case. It's one that that's going, I think, to grab a lot of attention going forward. And I think it's really exciting. I think it's exciting that, I know Patrick was saying we pick our battles earlier today, and I think this is a good one for us to fight. It doesn't only obviously have implications for the Catholic schooling sector, but for the Christian schooling sector, for many of you others here involved in faith-based schooling and even in other faith-based institutions. So it's an exciting time. I'm kind of glad the Catholics are standing up to do this one. So just to recap before I close and get to a few questions before lunch, we have to remember that our people are tired and we have to meet them there. We're tired too, but we have to meet them there and address them with clarity, personality, making it personal and making it easy. To engage Catholics, you need the bishop and the parish newsletter, funnily enough. And if we're picking our battles, let's work together and perhaps pick this one and see what happens. Thank you very much.